Mobius, 75 anos e uma impressionante vitalidade, é conhecido como o guru dos mercados emergentes. Tem um jeito todo especial de conhecer os países onde investe. Passa 250 dias por ano viajando, conhecendo as pessoas, as indústrias, e hoje dirige um fundo de investimento de 25 bilhões de dólares. Ele é o nosso entrevistado do Conta Corrente Especial.
Mr. Mobius, few people in the entire planet has traveled as much as you has and know as many countries as you do, as many industry. So you are in the position to take the world economic pulse. And how is it now?
It's very good. There's a lot of consumption going on, particularly in emerging markets, lots of construction. There's a boom in many of these countries. In emerging markets, the growth is 3 times that of the developed countries. This year we expect about 6% average real growth in emerging markets. China and India, the 2 most populated countries in the world, are growing over 8% this year.
Even about US, you are optimistic?
Even in the US, 2 years ago people were asking me, do you expect a double dip? And I said no, because I saw that the Purchasing Managers Index was going up, and there was a tremendous opportunity for growth in consumption among American consumers. So although unemployment may be high, consumption is back in America.
What's the big picture, in big strokes, of the global economy nowadays?
Europe, the US, Japan are slower in their growth. But you must remember, those economies are larger, so their base is much more difficult. So we're seeing slower growth in those developed countries and higher growth in emerging countries. But the bottom line is that various sectors around the world are growing at a rapid pace. For example, in the raw materials, mining and materials sectors in the US, in Australia, and in other parts of the world, the growth is very, very high because there's a demand for these materials from emerging markets.
Which are the most problematic spots?
The most problematic probably would be Western Europe because of the big debt. But even there, they are adjusting to these debt problems. They will work it out. It'll take time, but they will work it out. There are a few countries like perhaps Venezuela, where the government policies are not conducive to good growth, but these are exceptions rather than the rule.
You said even Egypt can be a good opportunity.
Definitely, because Egypt has got a big population. They've got a cadre of well-educated young people. The population is very much like a pyramid with lots of young people at the bottom, and this is a tremendous opportunity for growth in this country. What is needed, of course, is a government bureaucracy which is not corrupted to the extent that the Egyptian bureaucracy is corrupt, and a situation where there's more freedom to do business, to express themselves, and so forth. And I think that's coming as a result of the demonstrations we've seen.
Aren't you afraid of a big wave of fundamentalists spreading throughout North Africa and Middle East?
No, I don't. I think the aspirations of the young people in Northern Africa, in the Middle East, are for more material. They would like to see a better life for themselves and their family. And you must remember, even if you're talking about Islamic fundamentals, the fundamentals in Islam are actually equity. They believe in equity. They believe in countries and companies' growth. So this is not incompatible.
You said last year that you fear a big crisis on international derivatives that amounts around $600 trillion, 10 times world GDP. Is it still lingering?
It's there. There's no question about it. And the size of these derivatives is increasing. So there is a risk of another disaster down the road. I'm not predicting it happening anytime soon, but we must be aware that this is a risk.
Ordinary people don't know exactly how derivatives work. Could you explain a little how does it work and how it can drive us to a disaster?
Well, we can take the example of the subprime crisis. The subprime crisis was exacerbated by derivatives, because what was happening is that you had a loan that was sold to someone else and then sold to someone else and packaged into a bunch of loans. And people who bought these loans were afraid that they would not be paid, so they wanted to buy an insurance policy. So the investment bankers formulated an insurance policy called a credit default swap, CDS. Then other people thought, well, gee, I think these loans are not going to be paid. I'll also buy a credit default swap. So you had a lot of people buying insurance on the same product. So it's like buying insurance on a house 5 or 6 times. So the size of the insurance became far, far greater than the actual product. And of course, as soon as the product defaulted, as soon as there was a failure, all of these people had to be paid off. And the insurance company in no way could pay this tremendous debt.
There's an immense $600 trillion snowball.
Exactly. Somewhere. If something happens and too many people are making a bet on a particular product, then you could have a big disaster.
So, it's like a good perspective. And there's some way to prevent this?
Well, regulation, for one. One of the reasons why we had the subprime crisis is because the famous Glass-Steagall Act, which was passed during the American Depression in the 30s, was nullified by the American Congress. And when they did that, of course, that meant the banks could mix the funds that they collect from deposits into their investment banking side, and they could basically gamble that money. And of course, when they got into trouble with these credit default swaps, then the government had to come to the rescue, because all these depositors would not get their money back.
As I could read, you think Asia is a big winner. You mean Asia or China?
All Asia, because China now has become a focal point for the rest of Asia. Because now...
Pushing the rest.
Well, yeah, because the exports from these countries are going to China. And now Japan, Korea, of course Taiwan, Thailand, and all these countries, their biggest export destination is China. They're exporting more to China than to the US. So China has become a very, very big stimulator to these economies.
Do you think China growth will last for many years and decades, or it will come to an end?
It is sustainable, but at a slower pace, because what happens is that as the base of the economy grows, it becomes more difficult to have such a high percentage increase, because the percentage increase, of course, is based on the total economy. As the total economy gets bigger, it becomes more difficult to sustain such a high growth rate.
You said that Asia and China is a big winner, but you have a special place to Brazil too. Do you think Brazil is a good place to bet?
Of course, Brazil is very good because they have a well-rounded economy. Brazil is rich in resources, in mineral resources, but it's also rich in the so-called soft commodities, food processes. And that combination is very, very good. In addition, Brazil has a large, growing consumer market, and that is very positive.
And do you see any danger to Brazilian economy in next times?
There are all kinds of dangers, of course, all kinds of risks, because the Brazilian real, of course, is quite overvalued now, and that creates some degree of risk in terms of their exports and the manufacturing base of the country. There are also risks, political risks in the region, as you know. You've got neighbors who may be not as stable as they could be. And then you've got global risks like what we mentioned about derivatives and money supply.
You certainly followed the first movements of the new Brazilian government. How do you feel about this?
So far it's been quite positive. Of course we were very surprised by Lula. We never expected him to perform the way he did. And now with the new president we think things are going very well.
Do you think the $50 billion cut was deep enough?
No, I think it's okay. I think it's a good move. The fact that they made that move is very positive. Because there is a role for more spending in education. That is one area where Brazil has to really focus, because there will be a need for a more educated workforce going forward.
In this trip, have you the opportunity to mingle with Brazilian people and feel how they are, got some special feeling of them?
Yes, I think it's been very positive. People are generally happier now. Their standard of living is going up. More people have homes. I think the law and order situation has improved as well. So I think these are all good signs.
How do you compare the first visit you made to Brazil in the 80s and the most recent one?
Of course, it's very different because now it's a more stable environment. At that time, because of the hyperinflation, it was very unstable economically.
What do you feel about the Brazilian mood during this visit?
And the same thing with people. At that time, they had to worry what was the inflation rate every day, and they had to go out and spend their money quickly. Now it's more steady.
Was there any event that causes this interest for emerging markets?
Well, I studied psychology and sociology in college, and also one of my first jobs was doing survey research among consumers. What does the consumer want? So I was used to the idea of meeting people and surveying people. And when we started in the investment research side of things, we realized that in order to get good information, you've got to meet people and talk to people. So it's just part and parcel of what we do.
Which are good signs that you can see that the country is a good place to invest or not?
Well, the first thing, you've got to look at the total environment in the country. And most important is taxation. If the government is taking too much taxes away from the people, then it's not a good sign, because there's not enough money for investment and not enough money for people to grow their businesses. So I think taxation is a very key element. The other key element is corruption. If you see a lot of corruption in government, a lot of bureaucracy, that holds back growth and productivity. I would say those two factors are very important because they also have a lot to do with infrastructure. Are there enough roads, enough railroads? Is there a subway system? Is there a system of justice? All this infrastructure is very, very important. So we look at all of these things. But at the end of the day, we look at individual companies. What is the individual manager of a company doing? How is he creating value? This is our most important focus.
In this item, taxation, Brazil's a kind of world champion of taxation.
Yes.
It doesn't scare you?
Well, it's a problem. It's something that we have to watch very carefully. But the tax levels here, depending on the industry, may not be that high. So we see that companies are able to survive.
But there are some signs that you feel when you disembark in an airport or in a cab, that you can feel from people that here's a good place to put money, it's not a good place to put money. What signs are there?
Well, the sign is really coming from the companies we talk to. Once you sit down with a manager of a company and you ask him about his life, about how he's running his business, what problems does he have, then you can get a pretty good idea of what the environment is.
Mm-hmm. But don't you get information from ordinary people?
Of course, yeah. I mean, talk to people on the street. What is their life like? What is their spending habits? Are they able to afford things? Can they buy the things that they want? What is the unemployment level? How are they able to make ends meet, so to speak? Do they make enough money to just buy food and their rent, or do they have more money to spend on other things? So all of these factors are very important.
And is there any sign that when you arrive in a country that you see and tells you that it's not a good thing, it's something that calls your attention, or each country has special signs?
It's really different from each country, and it's dangerous to take only one thing. You've got to look at the whole environment and talk to many people, because your first impression may be very bad, but actually things may be better than they seem.
Can you tell us any special visit that you are with kind of thoughts that will not work well and surprise you in a positive way?
No. Most of the time we're able to get a pretty good insight after we've talked to 20 or 30 people and we visited companies. Of course, there's certain cases, like in the case of Venezuela, when Mr. Chavez came into power, we knew that this was not going to be good. So we got out completely.
Do you have an advice for a beginner investor?
Yeah, be patient, number one. Don't listen to rumors, number two. Number three, study and research. Don't just jump in without proper study and research. And number four, take a long view. Don't take a short-term view.
2.5 years past of the big slump of 2008. What lessons we can draw from them?
A lesson is, again, be patient and be ready to buy when everyone else is selling. If you had purchased stocks at the beginning of 2009 or the end of 2008, you would have made 100% or more in emerging markets.
Why such a big crisis took by surprise so many skilled investors like you?
Because no one knows exactly when a crisis is going to hit. And that's the definition of a crisis, really, is the surprise. People are not prepared, and therefore it creates a crisis.
Why are you bullish about Brazil?
Because I see the changes that are taking place, not only at the government level, but at the individual level, the companies, the way they're run. There's big improvement in the management of companies in Brazil, big improvement in corporate governance. But also, we must look at the global situation. The globe, the world, is much better today than it was last year or the year before or the year before that. So we're seeing a continuous improvement in technology, in consumer behavior, in the running of companies, and so forth. So we're in a very glorious period of mankind's history.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mobius. It was a real pleasure talking to you. E obrigado a você, assinante, que acompanhou essa entrevista. Aproveitamos para convidar para o próximo Conta Corrente Especial. Até lá!